Hello, everybody. Welcome to Buried Pearls Bible Study, where we break down the Bible verse by verse.
As we gather in the name of Jesus, He's right here in our midst.
Okay, Revelation 6, the first four seals and the four horsemen. Now, the four horsemen comes from some scriptures in Zechariah. Now, they may not be the exact same horses or horsemen, but at the very least, the symbolism is the same and the idea is the same. So, let's start off there. Zechariah 1, verses 7 through 11. On the 24th day of the 11th month, which is the month of Shabbat, in the second year of Darius, the word of the Lord came to the prophet Zechariah, the son of Bechariah, son of Iddo, saying, I saw in the night, and behold, a man riding on a red horse. He was standing among the myrtle trees in the glen, and behind him were red, sorrel, and white horses. Then I said, What are these, my Lord? The angel who talked with me said to me, I will show you what they are. So the man who was standing among the myrtle trees answered, These are they whom the Lord has sent to patrol the earth. And they answered the angel of the Lord who was standing among the myrtle trees and said, We have patrolled the earth, and behold, all the earth remains at rest. Now let's go a little bit further in Zechariah 6, 1 through 8. And this sort of sets the stage for the four horsemen, or the first four seals of Revelation. Zechariah 6, 1 through 8. Again I lifted my eyes and saw, and behold, four chariots came out from between two mountains, and the mountains were mountains of bronze. The first chariot had red horses, the second black horses, the third white horses, and the fourth chariot dappled horses, all of them strong. Then I answered and said to the angel who talked with me, What are these, my Lord? And the angel answered and said to me, These are going out to the four winds of heaven, after presenting themselves before the Lord of all the earth. The chariot with the black horses goes toward the north country, the white ones go after them, and the dappled ones go toward the south country. When the strong horses came out, they were impatient to go and patrol the earth. And he said, Go, patrol the earth. So they patrolled the earth. Then he cried to me, Behold, those who go toward the north country have set my spirit at rest in the north country. In biblical language, in the north country, the north is a representation of invaders or foreign armies that would conquer Israel. So when we say that they will frequently say invaders from the north or the king of the north. And that's because the Assyrians, the Babylonians, they had invaded Israel from the north. And so at the time of Zechariah, when these verses were written, they were returning from the exile of Babylon. The Jewish people were returning to Jerusalem, and this is about the time where they were going to embark on building the second temple again. Remember Ezra and Nehemiah in rebuilding the temple and the wall. So they're returning to Jerusalem, and they're coming back from the exile. Everything's hectic. And so these horses, these chariots, they represent the Spirit of the Lord going out to all of the earth and ensuring that there's peace, ensuring that the Israelites can rebuild. So these horses, these chariots, are the Spirit of the Lord going out into the world to make sure the conditions are ripe for rebuilding. And that's exactly what we have in Revelation. These four horsemen, and we will see, they bring earthly calamity, they bring warfare, pestilence, famine, these kinds of things, but they are sanctioned by the Lord so that the new heavens and the new earth can be rebuilt. And so here in the time of Zechariah, these horses and these chariots go out and they make sure that the stage is set so that the temple can be rebuilt, so that the Jewish people can be rebuilt. But so we see as we dive into the four horsemen, it's connected to these chariots and these horses in Zechariah. The Spirit of the Lord is going out to make a way. And here in Zechariah, they bring peace. What we don't really know, but somehow they pacify or nullify the enemies of Israel. And in Revelation, these verses are pacifying non-believers, bringing destruction to the earth so that something new can be built. And amen. So continuing on, Revelation 6 verse 1. Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals, and I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. Now, each seal, right? Now I watched when the Lamb opened one of the seven seals. Each one of these seals is initiated by the Lamb. And so sometimes we speak of, well, why does God ordain evil? Not that he ordains evil, but he allows it to happen. Why does God allow suffering? Why does God allow these things to happen? And here we'll see that these riders bring destruction to earth, and it is initiated by the Lamb. And so what we sort of see here is the Lord is stepping back and allowing humanity to run its course. He's allowing free will to reign on earth. God is stepping back and allowing this broken world to cave in on itself. Okay? And so it's important here. Now, each one of these group of seven seals, trumpets, and bowls have a pattern. They have like a 4-3 pattern. The first four are earthly judgments. In the case of the seals, it's the four horsemen, and the other three are other judgments, divine judgment, things like that. But the first four are earthly judgments. Now, the first horseman. Then it says that I heard one of the four living creatures say with a voice like thunder, right? And throughout the book of Revelation, the four living creatures, they lead heavenly worship. They're part of the retinue around the throne, and they implement divine judgments. And the presence of the four living creatures here, it separates the four horsemen unto themselves and separates them from the other judgments. So the four horsemen are a package deal, and that helps us to interpret them as well. So we have three options with the first horseman. There are three options here. It could be Jesus, it could be the Antichrist, and it could be just neither of those and a plain rider, right? just a regular rider. Now, I'm going to tell you what I believe, but I'm going to break down the case for each one, right? So, behold, a white horse, and its rider had a bow, and a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. So the case for Jesus, that this is Jesus, right? He comes on a white horse, just like Revelation 19:11. Then I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse. The one sitting on it is called Faithful and True, and in righteousness he judges and makes war. And sort of in Matthew 24:14, conquering in triumph. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. Now we know white is also the color of righteousness. And in Revelation 6:8, it sort of recapitulates the idea or repeats the second through fourth horses, and sort of leaves the first rider, the first horseman, as its own independent thing. Revelation 6:8, and I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him, and they were given authority over a fourth of the earth, to kill with sword, and with famine, and with pestilence, and by wild beasts of the earth. And so that is sort of a restatement of the second, third, and fourth horsemen. Also, with the case for Jesus, is that the rider goes forth with a crown. Obviously, that might be a sign that it's Jesus, right? And a bow, which could represent the gospel. And then the second rider is described as a different rider. And so for those reasons, many people believe that the first horseman is Jesus himself. Now let's break down the case for the Antichrist. If it were the Antichrist, it would bring unity to the four horsemen, because the other three horsemen aren't good. They bring bad things. So if this first rider were the Antichrist, it would sort of, keep unity within the four horsemen. And this rider carries a bow, whereas Jesus has a sword. Another point for this being the Antichrist is that wars and rumors of wars lead to nation rushing against nation and kingdom against kingdom. Sort of this idea that the Antichrist will conquer. And so the language in this verse, right? And a crown was given to him, and he came out conquering and to conquer. And so we have this idea here that of conquering and wars and rumors of wars, and sort of this destruction of what will happen, what the Antichrist will bring. Because if you remember, it says in Revelation later on that the Antichrist will eventually be over every nation on earth. That's what it says, that he is given the power to rule over every nation. And continuing on with the case for the Antichrist, the four horsemen are too related to one another. Like I said, that unity for one to be dramatically different, sort of ruling out the case that it's Jesus. In Revelation 13:7, it says, God allows the beast to make war against the saints and conquer them. So that language of conquering sort of fits with the Antichrist. And so now, if the first horseman is just a general rider, not Jesus or the Antichrist himself, it just speaks to the human lust for war and its consequences. Now, we've all seen throughout history how empires, basically, as soon as a nation gets strong enough, they go attack the next nation. And you can find that throughout human history, even currently. So those are some of the ideas with the first horseman, that it's Jesus, it is the Antichrist, or it is a general rider. I believe personally that it is just a general rider, and that the conquering and to conquer is just allowing us to do what we do, allowing humans to engage in the destruction that we've always engaged in, and that our lust for conquest and for domination and for war is being allowed to run amok, to run wild, as it were. Moving on. Verse 3. When he opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature say, "Come." And out came another horse, bright red. Its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people should slay one another. And he was given a great sword. Okay, so this second rider. So we see a progression from the first rider to the second rider. The first one, and he came out conquering and to conquer. Now the second rider on a red horse here, it says that he was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people should slay one another, and he was given a great sword, right? So I believe that the war and the conquering mentioned in the first horseman carries over into the second, and the second horseman represents civil war, represents not only nation going against nation, but now we have utter chaos as nations turning over and fighting within themselves, right? So this is the first horseman sort of graduating into civil war. And so we have this progression we'll see from one horseman to the next. So the horse is fiery red, which symbolizes the terrible bloodshed and slaughter that will take place around the world. This red color is also the color of the great dragon in Revelation 12:3. And another sign appeared in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads 7 diadems. And the dragon also hates and wants to eliminate the people of God. Now, this rider has 3 tasks: to take peace from the earth, to cause people to kill one another, and use a sword to accomplish this purpose. Now, these actions are governed by Edoth, right? That word Greek, it was given to him. So again, we see that God is allowing these things to take place. It says that he was given a sword to accomplish, and he was given a great sword. Now, the sword is a symbol of military might, right? Is the Romans were the ones that conquered, right? And the Romans had the power to execute. The emperor and the governors underneath him had the sole right to execute anyone that they felt was necessary. And so we have this sort of imagery of the Roman Empire and these allusions to the empire itself. And so we know the Pax Romana, which was the peaceful period of the Roman Empire created by Augustus. And so this is the opposite of the Pax Romana. This is sort of utter chaos, right? War turning into civil war, right? And so this civil war, the idea of the civil war, as we know in 2 Thessalonians 2:4, the man of lawlessness, right? And that time of, it has been translated as falling away or rebellion, right? So we'll have infighting, right? And that's what the second rider is all about. Now, the word, it says to slay one another in the Greek, right? Sosin. I may be saying that incorrectly, but however, it means not just to kill, but to slaughter, right? So the description of what's going on here, this evolution from conquering to slaughter, to civil war. Now, this idea of empires falling apart, of things changing, right? You know, Alexander the Great, the Macedonian Empire, when he fell, you know, the empire split into those four factions. I believe it was his four children, and they were vying for control of the empire. And then around, you know, in the years before the destruction of the temple, there had been several uprisings, including the Jewish uprising that ultimately led to the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. So we have, again, images of the Roman Empire, sort of what it represented with the sword, the military might, the executions, and the destruction of the Roman Empire as well. Moving on to verse 5. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third living creature say, "Come." And I looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, "A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm the oil and the wine." Okay. And so we can see some of the language. And I looked is lacking from the second horseman, but it's here for the third one. So he says, and I looked for the first horseman. He doesn't say it for the second, but he says it for the third, which is further evidence that the first and second rider are linked. The one that comes to conquer, right, and the one that takes peace and brings slaughter. So war graduating to civil war. Okay. Now, this third horseman, right? So we see that, and I looked language again. Now, the third and the fourth seal are the effects of war here. A black horse signifies sorrow and mourning that will be caused by famine and suffering that accompanies these wars, right? In Revelation 6:12, that black as sackcloth. Sackcloth is the traditional Jewish garb for mourning, sackcloth and ashes, right? So black as sackcloth. So there will be terrible mourning throughout all of the earth here. This rider has scales in his hand. Now, what does it mean? A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Did I say that correctly? A quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius. Right. Now, a denarius is a day's wage for your typical laborer. You work all day and you get a denarius, right? And so here it says a quart of wheat for a denarius. Now, a quart of wheat would be enough possibly for one person for one day. So you work all day to get enough wheat for yourself, right? But what this is saying is a man's earnings would be barely enough to feed himself, let alone his entire family. So if you have any kind of family, you're out of luck, because during this time you will barely be able to feed yourself. We're talking about food costing 10 to 12 times the normal rate. And so famine accompanies these wars and civil wars. Now, that phrase, "do not harm the oil and the wine," could be any number of things. I'll give you a few different cases of what it could possibly be, and then I'll tell you what I think it is. But I'd just like to throw some options and different ideas out there, because I think it's important to know to not just be taught one thing. Okay. So do not harm the oil and the wine. The oil and wine were luxury items, right? If you can barely afford wheat and barley, you're not going to be running around with oil and wine. And so what some people believe is that that the poor will struggle during this time, but the rich will be okay. And we live in times right now, the greatest time of economic disparity ever known in the history of man. Elon Musk was just named a trillionaire officially. So, you have people, average Americans struggling to put food on the table and struggling to pay basic bills, right? But it's, do not touch the oil and the wine. You have those who are the oligarchy, the social media tycoons, the people with trillions of dollars, right? And so some people believe that's what it's referring to. Also, another idea is that God is ensuring that this famine won't be too severe, because oil and wine are depicted as secondary crops, right, in the Old Testament. So it's saying that although there will be famine, maybe this famine won't be as severe as won't people will be able to survive it. Others believe that the oil and wine, because they represent sacramental items, that it's a reference to the believers, right? I don't subscribe to the pre-tribulation rapture. I don't think it's biblical. And so some people believe that when don't touch the oil and the wine is the same thing as saying don't touch the believers. It could be a preterist view during the siege of Jerusalem. John of Giscala was a Jewish man who was defending the temple from the Roman siege in 70 AD, and they were they were stuck in the temple, and there was chaos, and the people were starving, and eventually they started to get into the oil and the wine because they were starving. But to the Jewish people, this caused chaos and infighting. And so some people believe this is a reference to that event, a preterist view. And one final idea before we move on is just historical circumstances. In 92 AD, Emperor Domitian decreed that half the vineyards in the province should be cut down to increase grain production because there were grain shortages. But it caused such an uproar in the empire that he had to rescind the order. But so when they cut down the vineyards to increase grain production, but it made the famine even worse because the vineyards take years to come back. And so it just made things even worse. And so it could be a reference to something like that. But I believe when it says do not harm the oil and the wine, I think it's a reference to the fact that most people will be extremely poor with this famine, barely able to survive, but there will be a few who are ultra rich who this famine won't affect them, is my personal belief. Okay, moving on. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, "Come," and I looked, and behold, a pale horse. And its rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of the earth to kill with sword and with famine and with pestilence and by wild beasts of the earth. Now, this rider comes on a pale horse, sort of a yellowish green color, a yellowish green horse, from the Greek there. If you look up the word, it means yellow or green. Now, that is the pallor of a corpse. The first thing that happens after death sets in is this, your skin loses its color. It becomes you well yellow or green. It just that's the first, so when you know that's the first thing that happens upon the loss of life, is the skin changes color, and that is the same color as this horse, right? And as we see, because death and Hades follows him. Now death and Hades are personified in the book of Revelation. If we go back to Revelation 1:18, and it says, "And the living one, I died, and behold, I am alive forevermore, and I have the keys of death and Hades," it says in Revelation 1:18. In Revelation 20, verses 13 through 14, "And the sea gave up the dead who were in it. Death and Hades gave up the dead who were in them," personified, "and they were judged, each one of them according to what they had done. Then death and Hades were thrown into the lake of fire." This is the second death, the lake of fire. And so, Hades is the god of the Greek god of the underworld. And so we have a reference here to death and Hades followed him. Now, the Greek for that word death, thanatos, is translated in the Septuagint, the LXX, as pestilence, right? So we have this double image of basically death and pestilence, or death by plague, death by sickness. And the imagery that we have here with the fourth rider is that Hades, the god of the underworld, is gathering up the corpses that are left behind by death and pestilence, death by plague. So people are dying from sickness, and Hades, is the lord of the underworld, is picking them up, is picking up these bodies as they fall. So we have this, the three methods here that are used to summarize the second, third, and fourth: by sword, and by famine, and by pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth, right? And so these three methods, we can quickly break them down so that you understand where this imagery is coming from, because it much of everything that's being said here comes from the Old Testament. Just like the riders and the horses, you can listen to this at any time and go back and see that the horses and the chariots come from Zechariah. They come from Zechariah, but we'll see that the seals and what happens also comes from the Old Testament as well. The by sword, and by famine, and by pestilence, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Well, the sword is the first two seals coming to conquer, and came out conquering and to conquer. And then the second rider, the second seal, to take peace from the earth so that the people should slay one another. So the sword is the first two horsemen, right? Famine is the third, and pestilence is the fourth seal. Now, all of this comes from a verse in Ezekiel 14:21. "For thus says the Lord God, how much more when I send upon Jerusalem my four disastrous acts of judgment: sword, famine, wild beasts, and pestilence, to cut off from it man and beast." And so in Ezekiel, that those were God's judgment on Jerusalem. So what we have here with the four horsemen, and I'm going to close this up here, is that the horsemen in Zechariah were the spirit of, they were sent out. It was God, the Spirit of God, going out to prepare the earth so that the Israelites back then could rebuild the temple and rebuild the wall. And here in this, the four horsemen are going out and they're laying the groundwork so that the new heavens and the new earth can be built. Because throughout Revelation, the message is to keep the faith, to endure till the end, right? To hold tight, right? To keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. That's the point. Because these four riders are going to bring war, death, plague, famine, disease. All of these things are going to run wild on earth, right? But have no fear, because Jesus is coming back, right? And so that's the whole point of Revelation here. And so we can see that this is God, the first four seals, and this is all just, this is humanity falling apart. That's what the four horsemen are. It's humanity falling apart, where we war against one another to a greater degree, wars and rumors of wars and all of this stuff, slaying one another, come out conquering to conquer. And then we have, as a result of that, we have famine, we have scarcity of resources, and then finally sickness and death. And it is God stepping back and allowing sin to run wild as the opening of the book of Revelation. Because the Lamb is the one that opens and initiates each one of these seals. And then in the same way, it is God gives us free will and he steps back. So all of the pain and suffering and the different things that humanity does to one another, they aren't God. They're the result of our free will. They're the result of the free will that God has given us. And so what we see here with these four horsemen is free will running wild, right? Our sin allowing humanity to collapse in on itself, basically. And so that's what we have for the four horsemen. And I know it sounds, scary, but I just want to remind you of this, Revelation 3:10, where it says, he will keep you from the hour of trial. If you keep Jesus in your heart and you in your mind and you stay focused on him, everything will be just fine. So, but that is the four horsemen. Amen. So I love you all, and I will catch you in the next go round in Revelation after I study for 3 weeks.